Unlike animals, plants literally are sitting ducks. They've got their roots in the ground and they can't move around. This makes it really hard if an herbivore comes in and starts feeding on your tissues for you to get away. So plants have evolved a variety of ways to actually avoid getting exploited by consumers who want that hard-earned energy, nutrients, proteins, carbohydrates that you've spent your entire life putting together. And they can be categorized into these broad areas here. One is to have life history characteristics that basically make you or enable you to avoid the damage altogether. These are traits that have to do with being very rapid at growing, being ephemeral in a sense. You get in, you germinate, you grow, you set seed, you reproduce, and you're out of there before you can be found or exploited by herbivores. And there's all sorts of plants that have these very rapid life history traits. Plants can also defend themselves. We've talked about that, and we're going to spend the remainder of these next couple of lessons talking about that. First, they have physical traits that make them hard to actually break through the tissue and feed upon them. And then they also have a whole suite of incredible pharmacopoeia of chemicals that they have evolved for a variety of reasons that also make herbivores suffer, die, repel them, and have all kinds of other effects. Most of the interactions between plants and herbivores actually occur at this chemical level. It's a world that you and I basically are oblivious to. We can't smell the same things that insects can. We smell some of the plant compounds that are put out there, but nothing like what insects are actually sensing and having to deal with. And we're going to learn more about this in some of the later lectures. Plants can also tolerate damage. Okay, you lose a little bit of tissue, but maybe the way that your plant physiology can respond to that is so that there isn't that big of an effect on your fitness. Plants can regrow tissues and maybe have buffers of reserves so that a certain amount of herbivory can actually be managed before there's any ill effects. So this is another way of dealing with herbivory. And then the other one is by indirectly decreasing herbivory through the interactions with other organisms in the environment, predators, parasitoids in particular, the natural enemies of those potential herbivores. So we're going to explore each of these in turn, primarily the plant defense and the indirect defenses to herbivory. So let's start with physical defenses. Plants can actually be really hard to break into. At the very first thing that insects have to do is actually attach themselves to a leaf, hold themselves long enough so that they can get their mouth parts into that plant tissue. This is for live plants, obviously. If you're a chewing herbivore, you literally have to break through the outer cells and release those materials so that you can get them into your mouth. And plants can be quite slippery, so that you can't actually get a firm purchase on them. They can be coated with cuticular waxes that basically make it like an ice rink where they just can't get their little tarsal claws in there. These are good for the plants because they prevent desiccation, but they make it really hard for insects to actually attach themselves to. The plants, rather than being slippery and hard to grab onto, sometimes actually have structures that create physical barriers for the insects themselves, especially for soft-bodied insects. These can be really treacherous for them. An example of this is trichomes. These are cuticular structures that come out of the surface of the leaves. They serve a variety of purposes, but they also have the added advantage that they can provide a physical defense against small insects. So you can imagine this leaf surface like this. If you're a tiny little insect trying to move around in here, this could literally be a thorny forest. If you've ever tried walking through a bush of raspberries, for example, and you feel those materials kind of scratching up against you, you don't want to get in there, and it can actually be quite damaging. And for soft-bodied homopterans, for example, this could be actually deadly. Some of these trichomes actually secrete compounds. These secretions can either just be glues that stick onto the insects. They can also be toxic themselves, so that the substance, as it touches the body of the herbivore, can actually be have negative effects. And sometimes, as you may hear from some of the other videos that we posted to, these secretions might actually even attract the natural enemies that come in and cue in on the fact that there's an herbivore there. And here's some pictures of some examples from some work that Tom Eisner did, showing how these glandular trichomes can actually be sticky and not permissive for insects that are trying to get onto them. And even large insects that aren't necessarily trying to feed on a plant can get caught up in there. Leaves can actually be quite tough for a variety of reasons. Structural molecules like cellulose and lignin, or compounds that contain silica in them. You could think of this as like sand. Grasses are really famous for doing this, where they will absorb silica from the substrate, from the soil, and actually put it into their cells. And if you and I were to eat sand, you can imagine what that's going to do to our teeth. Very hard, and can have quite a bit of impact. People study leaf toughness by doing things like trying to poke through the surface of the leaf with a standardized piece of equipment, measuring the force that it actually takes to break through. And you've got here an example of kind of the range of toughness from things like broadleaf plants like dicots, to woody plants, to grasses. As I mentioned here, grasses can be quite tough because of that silica that's in there, to things like palms and palm fronds, which are really hard. In fact, we use them for making baskets and making furniture sometimes because of their toughness. Imagine if you're an insect trying to break through that. There aren't actually that many. Again, picture yourself as a tiny little neonate larva here of these little chrysomelid beetles trying to break through and establish themselves on the leaves of their host plants, these eucalyptus trees. The tougher they are, as measured by the force that it takes to break through the leaf, the less likely these larvae can actually break through and start feeding on the tissue, compared to leaves that are softer and relatively more easy to penetrate. So it's a tough life if you're a tiny little insect. And if you're a little insect and you're feeding on plants that are full of tough silicaceous compounds, or just tough because of the crystals and the structures that are there, like these willows here, it could literally wear out your mandibles. This is the tip of a mandible from a young larva versus one that's been feeding on these leaves for a while. It's completely worn through, which makes it harder and harder then to make it onto the leaves. Some plants also have structures that can act as domatia, that is, little homes for other organisms. And the presence of these domatia can attract natural enemies to the leaves, which then act as predators and a secondary defense, if you will, of the plants. Here's an example from a study by Anurag Agrawal and Rick Carbon, where they manipulated the domatia on cotton plants. And they did this by actually putting little pieces of cotton at the bases of the axils of the veins of the leaves. And what they found was that when they added these domatia compared to when they didn't add them, the amount of spider mites, which is a key pest of cotton, was actually significantly lower, almost about half as common as when the domatia were there compared to when they weren't there. And in the cases where domatia were present, you actually saw this big increase in the amount of predaceous bugs on the leaves. And some of these actually were predatory mites themselves. And plants that had the domatia added to them actually saw an increase in the reproductive output of the cotton. That is, they had more bolls on them, and the bolls is what has the the material that we harvest to make cotton fibers out of. Now, they added these experimentally. There's actually variation in these traits across plants as well. Some plants, some varieties have them. Some populations have more or less of them. Grapes is a really common example where grape leaves will have these little domatia, little hairy structures at the base of their leaves. And again, this is an indirect defense through the action of the plant trait on the third trophic level. Here's some other examples of domatia in their interactions with ants. Ants have very strong some ants have very strong relationships with particular plants. For example, these are Cecropia plants. These are tropical plants that produce not only shelters for the ants, but also will create these little structures, these little food bodies that keep the ants on the plants themselves. You could think of this as the ant kind of scattering around some little snacks for these ants. And these ants, particularly in the genus Azteca, are very aggressive and will rip to shreds just about anything else that comes onto these plants. Domatia, myrmecodomatia, that is structures that are specifically used by ants, myrmecos being ants, is commonly seen in a variety of tropical plants that occur in areas with lots of ants. These are classic bull's horn acacias that attract in these pseudomyrmex ants. These horns, these petiole modifications of the leaf petioles of the plants actually will dry out and are hollow, and the ants will poke holes in them and actually set up their colonies within the actual bull's horns, these structures that are there. The plants will also secrete nectar from these nectaries, and they will produce these little lipid-rich bodies, anything to keep these ants on there. And these ants are fierce. If you've ever been stung by pseudomyrmex ants, which I have, this is actually quite painful. And the ants provide a variety of roles, not only removing herbivores from the plants, but they'll actually clear the vegetation out from around these acacia plants. They'll actually snip the developing axils of weeds that are trying to climb up the plants. So again, these last three examples are really ways in which physical plant traits have converted into a defense of the plant through the action of these other predators or competitors to the herbivores that might otherwise remove plant tissue and damage the plants.